I play this Fallout miniatures game, and to make my games more immersive, I'm recreating the Mall, one of the most iconic locations from Fallout 3, so that we can play one of the biggest games of Fallout Wasteland Warfare anyone has ever seen. But here's the problem, I've never actually built a game table before, so we're going to be making this up completely as we go along, and kind of hoping everything works out. But before we even get foam to the table, we've got to figure out what section of the mall we're building. So it's time to hop into Fallout 3 and go location scouting. The mall is quite an extensive area. There's no way we're going to be able to make the entire thing, but this section really interests me. There's this trench network, some elevation, and I can see how this could make for an interesting play area. This is really important when you're building a game table. If it looks nice, that's a bonus, but it's got to be functional and lend itself to gameplay. So with the area selected that we're going to build, I was able to very quickly figure out what size this game table would be, and that's where we ran into our first issue. This table is going to be massive. With the scale that I'm going with, it's going to be about 3 foot by 5 foot in length, which is massive. I'm pretty sure at this point I've bitten off more than I can chew. But this was no time for wallowing, so I grabbed my hot wire cutter, got my XPF foam, and set to work carving out all the pieces I'd need to create the foundations of the table. And I think we've got all the foam roughly assembled. So we've got the ramp coming in, we have the kidney bean, which is where they have some of the bridges that go across. We have the large sandbag emplacement here. The shielded turret goes here, and there's like a stairway that comes up into that. I actually thought it went round further, but it's not. This is just kind of vacant space, and the walls go down the end. This is what I'm calling a riser. This is just going to be a slab of dirt with another slab of dirt here. The walls come down. There's a walled enclosure type here, sandbags across there with the ramp going out. So I'm happy with this. I think we have the broad strokes, the kind of the big items all in place. So what I want to do is, where we can, glue these in, glue these down to the board. And glue I did. I used brown Gorilla Glue to add any unsecured foam set pieces to the board, like the sandbag emplacements and some additional walls, and I equally got to work on some of the detailing. In the mall trenches, we see a lot of wooden wall supports, and I wanted to recreate that here, so I got some craft sticks from Amazon and began chopping them up to size and adding them to the build. But here is where my desire to have things done quickly cost me. You see, I chose not to use PVA glue for a lot of these components because it was just taking way too long to dry. And it was really runny, so I used this brown Gorilla Glue. Normally Gorilla Glue is great, it's really adhesive, but this stuff expands as it dries, so any cracks or crevices would mean that this glue would expand out into them. For my wooden walls, this meant I had these big globs of hardened glue sticking out. It's not great, but we've got to keep going and hope we can fix them later, because things are about to get a whole lot messier. I filled in the cracks and seams in the board with some modelling compound in order to give some texture to the board, and then mixed some Mod Podge and brown paint together and began painting the entire board. This Mod Podge will help protect the foam, and mixing it with brown paint means it's easier for me to see where has been covered, since Mod Podge dries clear and transparent. Once that was done, I whipped out my airbrush and began priming the more decorative areas of the board, the wooden supports, the broken wall areas, before equally airbrushing the walls grey and giving them a dry brush for some added detail, which was honestly back-breaking work, leaning over this massive thing trying to spray every nook and cranny. But not only was my back giving out, my wife's patience was giving out too. This build had taken up our kitchen for weeks, and it was starting to become clear that either the table went, or you get the idea. So in a mad dash towards the finish, I started making the sandbags that would decorate the board. Now these are just made out of rolled up milliput that I then just cut up. It's not a perfect way of doing this, they're not very even. I'd actually recommend something like modeling clay in the future, as it would be way cheaper, but I started gluing these to the board layer by layer, airbrushing and detailing other parts of the build as each layer of glue dried. like the Brotherhood of Steel bunker door, which is actually just a board game accessory I stole from one of my other games and just stuck into the board because I thought it looked really great. The airbrushing stage of this build lasted a whole weekend. Between crafting sandbags and having to wait for my airbrush compressor to completely cool before I used it, it was just a time-intensive process, but with it done, I could finally get to flocking the table and get a sense of what this table was finally going to look like. I used Geek Gaming's Forest Path and City Rubble to flock the table, and I even managed to get some help too in order to do it. All that was left to do was add some static grass, paint the table border black, and call it done. This game board was a massive undertaking and was likely, most definitely, a bit too ambitious for a first build. It's not perfect, and it's not perhaps even an accurate representation of the mall from Fallout 3, but I've learned a ton from it, and I think that that has its own value. If you'd like to hear what I've learned and what I do differently, you can click the video on the screen, and if you want to see more videos like this in your subscription feed, then why not hit the subscribe button?